Welcome back to our channel on this beautifully chaotic day where the drama never sleeps and neither do we, because the latest developments in Los Angeles are absolutely mind-blowing and honestly a little bit heartbreaking. Grab your coffee and settle in because what we have to discuss today is going to completely change the landscape of everything we thought we knew about the current fashion wars. Just as House of Logan was sitting right there at its most brilliant and blinding peak of success, with the entire world watching and applauding the absolute genius of their debut collection, something terrible was happening behind scenes. You all remember that runway show where Hope Logan walked out wearing that $100 million Hope for the Future diamond, looking like an absolute goddess who had finally conquered her demons and stepped out of her mother's suffocating shadow to claim her own destiny. The flashbulbs were popping, and Bill Spencer was standing there with that signature smug grin on his face because he had bankrolled the ultimate publicity stunt and won the day. Katie Logan Spencer was practically vibrating with triumph because she had finally stuck it to Forrester Creations and proven that she was a force to be reckoned with in the fashion industry. It was supposed to be the beginning of a massive new empire for Hope, where she could finally breathe and create without Steffi Forrester breathing down her neck and constantly threatening to pull the plug on her funding. Then the universe decided to play the most cruel and twisted joke imaginable on a woman who has already been through so much emotional hell. Hope received a phone call from her doctor that completely shattered the glittering illusion of her new life and dragged her right back down to a terrifying reality. Early stage cancer. Just like that, a single word delivered over the phone or maybe in a sterile white doctor's office completely obliterated the high she was riding and replaced it with a cold and suffocating dread. Can you even imagine what that must feel like to be standing at the absolute pinnacle of your career with your face plastered across every fashion magazine and blog in the world while secretly carrying a death sentence inside your own body? Um, she was probably still wearing the leftover makeup from the runway show when she heard the news and felt the entire room spin out of control. Why didn't she tell anyone, you might ask yourself? Because it makes absolutely no sense to suffer in silence when you have a family that supposedly loves you. Look at the immense pressure she was under from every single direction. Katie and Bill had just poured millions of dollars and countless hours of aggressive corporate maneuvering into launching this brand specifically around Hope's name and her creative vision. They gave her a home at the Spencer Mansion when Brooke literally kicked her own daughter out onto the street in a fit of vindictive rage. Hope felt this crushing sense of obligation and guilt because she knew that if she dropped the cancer diagnosis right in the middle of their victory lap, it would completely derail the entire House of Logan operation and ruin all of their hard work. She couldn't bear to be the reason that Katie's dream collapsed, especially after Katie had stuck her neck out to defend her against Brooke's violent tantrums. So she smiled. She put on that brave face that she has perfected over years of dealing with Liam's waffling and Thomas's obsessions, and she pretended that everything was absolutely perfect while her body was quietly betraying her from the inside out. Living at the Spencer Mansion must have been an absolute nightmare of paranoia and exhaustion for her during this time. Liam is right there in the same house, and he is usually so observant when it comes to her moods, but she probably just blamed her pale skin and her sudden weight loss on the stress of the launch and the adrenaline crash that comes after a big event. She would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to Liam breathe, while a million terrifying thoughts raced through her mind about surgeries and treatments and whether she would even live to see Beth grow up. The physical toll of the illness started creeping in faster than she could have ever anticipated, and it was brutal. The bone deep fatigue that makes it feel like you are walking through wet cement, and the sudden sharp pains that take your breath away in the middle of a sentence were becoming impossible to hide. She would lock herself in the bathroom at the Logan offices and just lean against the cool tile wall, trying to catch her breath and stop her hands from shaking before reapplying her blush to hide how incredibly sick she looked. She was drinking copious amounts of espresso just to keep her eyes open during meetings, but the caffeine did absolutely nothing to cut through the heavy brain fog that was settling over her mind. Katie is a businesswoman first and foremost, and she is riding this massive wave of adrenaline and ambition that is completely blinding her to what is actually happening right in front of her face. Katie started aggressively pressuring Hope to start working on the next collection immediately because the fashion industry is a beast that constantly needs to be fed, and you cannot rest on the laurels of one successful runway show. Katie wanted sketches and concepts and fabric swatches, and she wanted them yesterday because she knew that Forrester Creations was going to strike back hard and Logan needed to maintain their momentum. She was probably marching into Hope's office every single hour with new demands and new ideas, completely oblivious to the fact that her niece was silently agonizing over a life and death battle. Hope tried to push through it because that is what Hope Logan does. She martyrs herself for the sake of everyone else's happiness and success. She sat at her drafting table with her pencils and her sketch pads, trying to force her brain to focus on hemlines and silhouettes when all she could think about was white blood cell counts and survival rates. Her brother, Deep Sharp, is right there in the building working as the lead designer, and he is so incredibly passionate and focused on his own career that he didn't notice the signs either. Deke was churning out brilliant designs and looking to Hope for guidance and creative direction, but Hope was just staring blankly at the pages, seeing hospital gowns instead of couture dresses. The pain was getting worse and the exhaustion was making her dizzy, and she realized with a sickening sense of despair that she physically could not do the job anymore. The breaking point arrived on a random Tuesday afternoon when the pressure simply became too much for her fragile body to handle. Katie was likely pushing her for a final decision on the color palette for the spring line, and Hope just snapped. Because how can you care about whether a dress should be cerulean or sapphire when you are wondering if you will lose your hair to chemotherapy? She couldn't fake it for another second. The words tumbled out of her mouth before she could even stop them, and she abruptly resigned from her creative position at Logan Designs right then and there. She didn't give them the real reason, of course, because she was still desperately trying to protect their investment and keep her tragedy a secret. Imagine the absolute shock and confusion in that office when Hope Logan, the woman who just risked her entire relationship with her mother to join this company, suddenly throws in the towel and walks away. Katie must have been completely speechless, staring at Hope like she had suddenly grown a second head. Bill probably immediately assumed it was some kind of negotiation tactic or that she was having a diva moment, because Bill Spencer only understands the world through the lens of power plays and leverage. They probably begged her to reconsider and offered her more money or more creative control, but Hope just shook her head and walked out the door, leaving them completely blindsided and scrambling to figure out how to save their next collection without their star player. The rumor mill in Los Angeles is a vicious and fast-moving machine, and the news of Hope's sudden departure from Logan Designs spread like absolute wildfire. Everyone immediately jumped to the most logical and cynical conclusions because nobody in this town can ever imagine that someone might actually be dealing with a real human tragedy. The whispers started echoing through the halls of Forrester Creations before Hope had even made it to her car. People were gossiping by the espresso machine and texting each other with wild theories about what went wrong between Hope and Katie. Steffi Forrester probably let out a loud bark of laughter when she heard the news and immediately assumed that Hope was just being flaky and unprofessional as usual. Steffi is sitting in her co-CEO chair, sharpening her knives and preparing for war, and she likely thinks that Hope couldn't handle the pressure of actually running a brand without the Forrester machine backing her up. Steffi might even suspect that this is all some elaborate game and that Hope is going to come crawling back to Forrester Creations, begging for her old job and demanding that Hope for the Future be taken off hiatus. The bitter irony of Steffi judging Hope for a lack of commitment while Hope is literally preparing to fight for her life is almost too much to bear. Brooke Logan must be absolutely losing her mind over this latest development because her entire worldview is currently colored by her boundless rage and her thirst for vengeance. Brooke has been pushing people and smashing signs and acting like a complete lunatic because she feels so betrayed by her sister and her daughter. When Brooke hears that Hope quit Logan, she probably thinks that her daughter has finally come to her senses and realized that Katie and Bill were just using her. Brooke is probably waiting by the phone, expecting Hope to call and apologize and beg to be allowed back into the family fold. Ridge and RJ are already terrified of Brooke's wrath, and they are probably bracing for another massive explosion when Hope doesn't actually return to the Forrester fold. Zende Forrester Dominguez is probably seething with anger over the news because he feels so incredibly slighted and tossed aside by Hope's actions. He designed an entire collection for her that got shelved, and then she abandoned him for Deke Sharp, and now she is abandoning Deke too. Zende probably thinks Hope is just playing with people's careers and treating the fashion industry like her own personal playground. Every single person in that building is projecting their own insecurities and grievances onto Hope's resignation, completely unaware of the devastating truth that is hiding just beneath the surface. The reality of the situation is so much darker and more tragic than any of the petty corporate gossip could ever capture. Hope isn't crawling back to Forrester Creations, and she isn't playing a strategic game of chess with Bill Spencer. She is packing a small overnight bag in the quiet solitude of a room, and she is driving herself to the hospital alone. She chose to walk into that sterile, terrifying environment without her husband or her mother or her father, Deacon, because she is so determined to carry this burden by herself. She is isolating herself in the most extreme way possible, and it is absolutely heartbreaking to think about her sitting in a waiting room, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights while her family bickers about dress designs and stolen jewelry. She is facing a life and death battle, completely stripped of the glamour and the power that she held just a few short weeks ago. The contrast between the flashing cameras of the runway and the rhythmic beeping of the hospital monitors is a cruel reminder of how quickly everything can be taken away. She is sitting in a hospital bed wearing a faded cotton gown instead of a couture masterpiece, and she is staring out the window at the Los Angeles skyline, wondering if she will ever get to be a part of that world again. She left all of her dreams and her ambitions behind in that design office at Logan because cancer does not care about your launch schedule or your profit margins. It makes you wonder what is going to happen when the truth finally comes out, because you know that a secret, this massive, cannot stay buried forever in this town. Liam is going to notice that his wife is missing, or he is going to find a medical bill hidden in her purse, and his entire world is going to collapse. How is he going to react when he realizes that he was so caught up in living at his father's house and dealing with the corporate fallout that he didn't even notice the woman he loves is dying right in front of him? The guilt is going to absolutely consume him, and it might just break him completely. And what about Brooke when she finally learns that while she was busy smashing company signs and disowning her daughter, Hope was silently suffering through the most terrifying ordeal of her life? The realization that her vindictive behavior pushed Hope away exactly when she needed her mother the most is going to destroy Brooke. It might be the one thing that finally snaps her out of this vengeful rampage and forces her to look at the collateral damage she has caused. Will Steffi feel even a single ounce of remorse for all the horrible things she said and thought about Hope when the news breaks? Or will she just find a way to make it about herself and her own family trauma? This entire situation is a tragic masterpiece of miscommunication and misplaced priority. They are all so obsessed with who owns which design and who is going to win the next fashion cycle that they have completely lost sight of their humanity. Hope Logan is fighting a solitary war in a hospital room while her family tears each other apart over dresses and diamonds. It is a sobering reminder that all the money and the success in the world cannot protect you from the fragile reality of human existence, and we can only pray that Hope finds the strength to survive this battle and reclaim the life that was so violently stolen from her.